This is the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast, hosted by David Charlton, and you're listening to this podcast to help you build your own mental toughness, or so that you can support other people or your clients better. Either way, you will learn more about developing this plastic personality trait that all but guarantees that you will perform better and lead a more prosperous life. Welcome back to the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with your host, David Charlton. Today, I had a fascinating conversation with a former professional footballer who played in a number of countries. She talked about her background in playing elite female professional football, her interest and passion for sports psychology. We talked about the different cultures that she played in and how this went on to influence her performance levels. Coach communication was a big part of our conversation too, as well as mental health. Enjoy listening to Hannah Bromley and her fascinating insights. Hi Hannah, could you tell the listeners a little bit about your background in football or soccer and your passion for sports psychology?
Yeah, I guess, obsessed with the game from a young age and turned pro when I was 21, 22 after a great stint in the US on a soccer scholarship. And, even before that, made the full national team for New Zealand when I was 17. So it was football all the time. And it continued through to 32, playing all around the world, playing professionally in Norway, Germany, South Korea, Australia. It was a good time, and obviously internationally for New Zealand. And I guess in terms of sports psych, it was so evident this is where the path was supposed to lead me, because the highs and the lows of sport were just incredible, and I just had so many questions all the time. I wondered why I couldn't get through little bouts of low confidence, and then I had little bouts of fear of failure, and just things to do with concentration or being consistent. And no one could really tell me anything, and I would be humming and hawing in my own head and not have any answers. So I started to do some trial and error on myself, and delved into the world of sports psych, and been obsessed with that ever since.
And here we are.
And here we are, absolutely.
So, yeah, as you've mentioned there, you've played in quite a few different countries. How have you found that? Obviously, the various different cultures and how that went on to impact your performances.
Yeah, look, there's something to be said about putting yourself out there and traveling around the world playing the sport you love, which is incredible. I guess when you're young, and everyone will attest to this too, you think less in terms of any particular issues that could arise. And I have always been known as a person who always took the opportunity when it came. So there were opportunities, and I took them, and I just went full blast, head first into any kind of scenarios that were coming to me. And it was an interesting ride being a female footballer, and I started that ride as a professional, 15 years ago now. And that was definitely when, women's football has just risen so much in so many ways in the last even 3 to 4 years, whereas back then it was still seen as something sometimes people didn't even know women did, and that was quite horrifying to find out that people thought that, but that's part of life, I guess. And it impacted me quite a bit with the different cultures, because what I realized was also not knowing the language of some countries, even in Norway, and that was the first pro team I'd played for. There was definitely a bit of a barrier, and it wasn't so much than maybe the particular words. It was just the culture and the way they did things, which was very different. You've got a very cold climate. I was up in the Arctic Circle in Tromsø, and very, very cold climate, a very insular type society. And whereas I'm a very outgoing typical Kiwi. And so I'm chatty Cathy to anyone and everyone, and great, how you doing? Yeah, cool, have a good day. And they didn't really want to bar of us too much, us internationals. They were pretty keen to say hi and hope that we played well, especially because we're internationals. But, the friendliness that myself and my teammate there, who was from the States, and she just graduated uni too, Lauren, we were both very outgoing and personable people, and we found it really difficult. So therefore, I think that affected our confidence throughout the team. It being so cold all the time was difficult. But yeah, just in terms of the cultures and trying to break into cultures and culture groups without even knowing anything about the culture first and foremost. So what I did after Norway, it was straight away, I said I was new, and what I wanted in my contracts was, an intensive language course no matter where I went. Because I said, out of respect as well to the country, but also, for my own confidence, and to be able to fit in with a country. So when I moved to Germany, I said, that's part of the contract, please. And they put it in. And after 4 months, fluent Deutsch, and that was great. Forgot it all now, but then it was good. And it made such a huge difference. You're laughing and joking in Deutsch, and and that was what it was about. You train hard, you play really, really hard. They're really ferocious, but then everyone's having a good joke afterwards. And to be involved in that, and to be involved in the culture, and to be immersed in the culture and feel a part of it, I think was really important. So yeah, and then continued on. Went to Australia. Didn't need to have another language for the Aussies. But, South Korea was extremely difficult. We actually were told that we were going to have we were going to be learning. Actually, first of all, we got told we were going to have a translator, and then that we would be learning some South Korean. And that didn't happen, so they were breaching a contract. So there's all sorts of cool, fun stuff that has happened in the world of women's footballing contracts, especially back in the day. I've got a lot of friends, a lot of good stories. So, yeah, no, it's those were massive ups and downs. Those really bang on your confidence. They can really make you quite insecure, being on the other side of the world, and different cultures can honestly make you feel more at home than others. I mean, playing in the States for 5 years was incredible, the time of my life, because the second I got into the uni team in Connecticut, it was like I had 20 sisters, and every single one of them were asking me, like they were almost competing to which one I would go to for Thanksgiving at their place. And it was like, oh, okay, cool. I'll go to them all, and come out of it like a big turkey. But it was very different cultures, and it definitely took a toll mentally, for sure.
Right, it's such a fascinating topic, actually, because obviously with football being a team sport, naturally the social side and having interpersonal confidence for one is such a big thing. So if you look back now as a performance psychologist, how do you think you would have helped the younger Hannah in those situations when you had those challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would have reached out a bit more. I didn't know of any sports psychs back then in particular, and I don't even know what I think I didn't even know what it was really called even then. And I know that's still quite typical today for a lot of people everywhere. As much as we think it's common, it's definitely not as much. Definitely what I'd tell the younger Hannah is everything that I communicate with the athletes now, and that is, it's a journey and it's a process, and it's okay to have the ups and downs. But what I would have loved is the tools and techniques that I will go through with players, and athletes on the daily that can help them on the daily. So those little bits, like getting, I would have really have helped from understanding that you can stop a thought coming through. So thoughts coming in, are you able to recognize that thought and go, okay, that's not helpful for me. That's actually replaying a memory from that game where I did really bad and I'm about to play a brand new game. Why am I going back to that? I'm going to all of a sudden randomly in the middle of the game remember something that the coach said, 3 weeks ago that I wondered, was it a bit of a dig at me or not? And so to be able to have the tools to be able to hear something come into your head and to go, no, stop, and then move on or change the narrative of the thought coming through, saying that it's actually not really true or it's a bit ridiculous. So being able to, understand not listening to the thoughts coming through, especially if they weren't uplifting and especially if they weren't true. So, yeah, that's definitely a big thing that I would tell my younger self and give myself the tools for that. I would also give myself the tools for conflict resolution towards players, my own teammates and coaches. Throughout all the years, of course, you have all these coaches and so many, and kind of as we've talked about previously, there seems to be a lot of coaches coming in and out all the time too. And there is like an element of, your relationship with that coach and how do you navigate something and not make it so you're trying too hard to impress the coach because they chose you for a reason. But how do you effectively communicate with that coach? What's their communication style and what's mine? And what do I do to make sure that I'm on par with the coach to communicate well? But that's really hard because so many of the times too, coaches are put on a pedestal, like I'm the coach and you're the player, one's higher, one's lower. And that makes you feel sometimes like you just need to do everything perfectly. And so I tried to, at different stages when, coaches, my national team coach, will be transparent, my national team coach, he was not great at communicating too effectively. He was quite harsh and rude in many occurrences. And unfortunately, we have a little bit of a problem with that around the world. So we also have to stamp that out. But, just saying things in particular that weren't necessary. I've known my particular national team coach made comments on my weight, as in, I needed to look like a different player from a different country who was this tall and skinny player. And I was like, what? I'm not from that country, and my parents are from New Zealand, and they look different from her. Well, what is going on here? And he's like, no, you need to look like her stature. Yeah, follow what she's doing. I'm like, I don't even know the chick. She's from another country. And and that set. And unfortunately, he did that to a couple of players, and that set off a whole range of really nasty things through from eating disorders to really huge lack of confidence within players. And I actually randomly ended up approaching that player. I actually played against her that he was talking about, who I was supposed to look like. And unfortunately, she was having to leave the game because, through a big bout of bulimia, she was not able to continue, and it's just ridiculous. So there's things that I could tell young Hannah, okay, try and understand, take in some information, but block out some other information. But there's also things when you're so vulnerable to coaches and, their power, that also would make it difficult. So that's something that has to come from a different educational coach level and ego level rather than the player, the young player especially. So there's probably stuff to do with conflict resolution, and as I said, with players, with your own teammates. I have throughout the different times, I've been a player who's been really aggressive, as in yelling, and been expecting my players to be really intense all the time, especially when I was an older player. And then there's times when I've been bullied. So, to have some tools and techniques surrounding what's okay, what's not, what's okay to report, what's not. and what is something that's a boundary and that's been crossed and really needs something to be done about. So because otherwise you're just left in limbo, and many times I was left in limbo.
That was really powerful what you said there, and I suppose it goes to show the importance of the role of the coach and actually what they're saying, and being very careful with their words. And really, I suppose a big part of our role is to, whether we're working with an athlete or a coach, is to try and help them become more self-aware.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so coaches can benefit from our work as well in that respect hugely.
Absolutely, because I think I was trained up as a coach and was en route to the B license in Australia, and you're taught a certain amount of stuff, but you're not taught like sports psych. And even though they are introducing it a bit now, you've also got to think you've got to look at it from different points of view. As a coach, I was taught the A, B's and C's and the formations and everything very specific. And it was less, about the player. And what I always thought was weird about that when I was going to those coaching licenses was, I just feel like some coaches do it differently, and one I always thought was Sir Alex Ferguson. And I always just thought, okay, he does something different. He connects. There's a connection. He's doing something different. I know he's doing something different, connecting with the players and on a more deeper level. And that wasn't happening here at all. And, it was like just the coach here and the player here. And that just leaves so much room for interpretation. So, yeah, it's I guess going through my coaching licenses, I was like, yeah, and I was really supported to go in the coaching route for women's teams and for the potential of international teams. And you know what, I just wasn't interested because the psychological side of the game interested me so much more than just the facts and figures and the wins and the losses, because I'd been through it all and I'd had enough heartbreaks and I'd had enough crazy championship amazing wins that you're floating in the air. So I was ready for some stable time.
And some surfing.
Yeah. And some surfing, 100%. That was floating into my life pretty quickly at the end of my career.
One thing you touched on there, and a message I try to get out to my audience, is the fact that if you're comfortable in your own skin, then you're going to be able to go out and freely express yourself on a football pitch or a golf course or whatever that is. But if there's that hierarchy and the coach is put on a pedestal, as an athlete, you're not going to be comfortable in your own skin, are you? Your confidence
Absolutely.
is going to be knocked straight away.
Well, that's it. That's where there's a difference between, I've known some players who have just kind of, I feel like it's magically been able to understand mindset areas of the game without even knowing that they did. And they were able to see the coach as someone as just the coach, and I'll work my hardest. And if they like me, they do. And if they don't, they don't. And to be honest, I know I had that mentality from about probably 12 years old to maybe 20. And then I started to care for some reason. But before I was like, I remember my mum saying to me at a game when I was like 15, my parents didn't know anything about sports. And mum said, isn't it a bit, it's quite frustrating. There's these scouts looking at you. Like, how do you, are you nervous? And I'm like, you know what, mum, they want me. If they don't, they won't. And that mentality was amazing. And that's also a mentality that I pass on to youth players who are trying to get into teams. I'm like, focus on your performance and the other stuff will either come or you'll be unlucky. And this is the cruel world of sports. But yeah, putting a coach on a bit of a pedestal and having that big distance in between is really, really difficult. Like, I know my personality as a player throughout playing for a couple of different teams, even in Australia, was knocked around a little bit because of, like, say, some politics or, that kind of gap, and also the politics, like, of the coach having maybe some favorites within, the players that they had known for many, many, many years since they were like really young children. They lived in the same area or whatever. And then, you're kind of trying to get in with the group and trying to show your stuff. But, you can lose a sense of, your playing ability and your confidence by having too much of a gap, between the coach and the player. And unfortunately, players can get very disturbed by it, that they don't want to really play anymore. And I've seen, I don't know, probably hundreds of players who that's happened to. There's been too much of a gap between them and the coach, and they're trying their best, but the communication's just not right. And then the players have gone, okay, well, they're the ones who can sack me. So, and they've gone, okay, well, maybe I'll opt out now.
Yeah, that's quite sad. That is. I know I've noticed with in coaching, generally, I suppose coaches are confident people, aren't they? The way they come across, because they have to be in order to communicate. But I suppose this one's an awareness piece for coaches here. If you are a confident person and you're very good at putting a game face on and hiding your emotions, then that can make you quite cold, and people just don't know, feel uncomfortable approaching you. And then,
definitely.
And then likewise, the really confident coach who has difficulty controlling their emotions.
Yeah.
I bet you've seen some of those where it's like a Jekyll and Hyde character, isn't it?
Yeah.
So do I approach them today or now, or should I wait an hour, and then you just don't do anything about it?
Absolutely. And, I've had times when I've approached coaches as a professional too, and approached them and said, hey, look, like, I'm keen to know, first of all, I just asked them, nicely, do you mind if we have a chat? And then go and say, hey, look, I really want to be the best I can be for this team. Like, tell me what I got to do. And some of them have literally said, there's not much. There's kind of a bit of a hierarchy, and you're like, okay. And then it's kind of wild, but that's been my journey. So, and then there's other coaches that are like, yeah, cool. Okay. So I need you to distribute the ball a little bit quicker when you get it from the back line. And like, it's slowing things down a little bit when you're getting it, especially on your weak foot. And so I'm going, oh, perfect. Thank you. Going to go work on that with my coach. Good. Done. With a one-on-one coach or with some mates or something, or another training session with the team. So, in order to, understand, that coach's like role, and as a player, especially a youth player, I work with, 9, 10, 11-year-old, 12-year-old players who are so scared of their coach, and they're just not even wanting to approach them in any way. And I've, because they might be yelling at them and saying sometimes they do some not great stuff. And once we've gone through the fact that mistakes are inevitable, mistakes are part of the game, all the great players, the women and men players across the whole world are making mistakes in their games on the daily, then just understanding that it's fine to make those mistakes, and to know that it's fine to make those mistakes, and that when the coach yells at you, they've usually got a plan in their head. They're thinking this, this, and this, and you're a player, you're thinking this, this, and this. So take the ounce of information through, but then make sure you're letting go of the aggressive tone if that doesn't work for you. For a lot of players, it works for them to be yelled at. Cool, each to their own. But, for the players, what I'd say is, to give them the tool of understanding the wording and the conversation that's coming through, or the yelling that's coming through during the middle of the game, and taking bits and pieces out of it and releasing some other part. Some parts aren't necessary all the time from coaches. 100%. And I've been a coach. So like some of the frustration and we just almost, gave up a goal from a ridiculous tackle or something. And then all of a sudden you just start to have a go at this player who didn't make that tackle in the first place. And then, you're in a different mindset as a coach. So then I've got to let the players know. And sometimes I do a little technique with the players, and they become a coach. And I say, what would you like your players to be like? And what would you like them to be like in the particular position that you play? Would you be stoked on a player who is only running 50% most of the game? Like, how would you feel as a little coach? And they're like, oh, no, I wouldn't actually. And I'm like, yeah, so you probably should run a bit more than 50% in a game. And so when they start to, especially young youth athletes, when they see a few things from different points of view, that you can see the smile on their face. They're like, oh, okay, cool. It's not actually a big deal. And it's, it's cool to see.
Yeah, and that's the power of good questions as opposed to just tell. And yeah. One thing that you touched on a little bit earlier as well was the comparisons. So coaches comparing player A against player B and things like that. And that to me is, I suppose they try to do it from a motivational standpoint at times to bring, but it can be quite harmful, can't it? And it has you questioning your own belief at times.
Yeah, absolutely. To compare a player to another player, like you just can't do it. And unfortunately, I've been on the back end of it, and I felt the wrath of being on the back end of all those horrible things that, you know, a coach in a huge power like the national team can say and get so affected. And I can 100% put my hand up. And from those words that came out of his mouth, you know, as I said, made me doubt myself, maybe doubt even where I was from. I was like, okay, well, I'm supposed to look like an Aussie chick and I'm a Kiwi, and like, I don't get it. And my body type is like my dad's, which is not like her dad's. And also, I thought I ate really well and I thought I was pretty lean, but you know what? Obviously, I'm not lean enough. And but then they didn't actually give me any constructive feedback on how to get to what this other particular player was like. So you know what? I went off with, all I had in my head was, I need to do this and I need to do this quick because I'm a high-performing athlete and I won't make the national team unless I do this because this is what the coach has said. So they're in this huge position of power, which they're taken advantage of. And obviously that led straight into bulimia for me, and it was horrendous. And it was such a secretive little horrible disease that, you know, it took years to get out of, but it had such a detrimental effect. You know, some points I was training up towards the Olympics and I was having 1 can of tuna a day.
Right. Wow. Yeah.
And, we had weightlifting for 2 hours and we'd have training for 2 hours. And, I'd have a can of tuna and then the next day could have, 5,000 calories and throw it all up. Like it was ridiculous. I lost a sense of self-worth. And it went really downhill. So I've really been to the bottom and built myself up. So it's understanding and I think with the players, and I think part of the reason why I just am so passionate too is because I empathize with the players, because I don't know if there's really a situation that I haven't been through. So it's wild, but coaches can make a huge impact. And I know one of my good friends, Kara McCormack from Canada, who used to play for the Irish national team. She's doing some fantastic work in terms of making sure that coaches who have, taken advantage of players are being, outed and hopefully at some stage arrested. So for a plethora of things. And unfortunately, it's just, it's just coaches. That's just a position of power. And with players, high-performance athletes are usually quite perfectionistic and will do anything to get there. And that means doing what the coach tells them to do, even if it's not appropriate.
Yeah, they're very impressionable on there for when even like from a young age, especially when you're trying to build your identity. It's really difficult.
Definitely. Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing what you have done. That was again very powerful, and obviously a really difficult time for you at that point.
Yeah.
On that note, as we begin to close, if you were to give 3 takeaways from our conversation, I suppose as tips for coaches, what would they be in terms of trying to incorporate some mindset, some psychology into their work?
Yeah, I'll definitely say, I think it is being incorporated now. If I was looking at, I think I was looking through some of the framework for, some FFA B license or something here in Australia. And there is a kind of a psychological part of it. What I'd say, for coaches is get on board and do some sports psych courses, just even whether it's online and through someone, reputable who's been doing it for a long time. Really get to understand, the different parts of what players go through so you can see them on a human level and not just as objects playing the game. And obviously in this past year or so, there's been so many things like the Olympics where, athletes have said no to performing because of mental health. And, we're not just, these little cogs in the wheel like athletes, to perform and entertain for everyone. There is an entertainment aspect, but when you take away the human aspect, you're turning athletes into robots. And that's inhumane. And I'm so glad so many players have stepped up. I don't think that would have been possible even 4 years ago for a couple of those athletes to have stepped up and spoke about their mental health, which is still such a stigma conversation, so unfortunately. So I'd probably say, for coaches, really, I would say get to know your players a little bit more. See what they do, what are they stoked on outside of football too, take the time to do it. Yes, it does take time and it does take a bit of energy, but it pays off to know your players. It pays off to understand if your players or athletes have a part-time job or whether they have a sick parent and all those kind of things. Get to know them and actually be a human and empathize with them. Be performance-based, of course, and results-based. That's coaching is a job, and you want results to keep your job. But there has to be that human side of it that I think is more prevalent now. But it's going to be a lot more important going forward for the mental health of players. And remember, players are humans. So, and what you got to realize that as a coach, how you could be affecting the player now. You've got to ask yourself, is it positively in a positive direction for their future, or is it going to be negative and going to affect them negatively outside of their sport as well? So you've got to be really self-aware and understanding of the words that are coming out of your mouth, as well as the direction where you're taking an athlete.
I completely agree, and I suppose that's where the role of sports psychology is going to probably evolve to as well, and become more and more to the fore in the future. It's going to be an interesting, I suppose, to watch over the next few years, because in some ways, 2021's been a big year in that a lot of high-profile sports people have been talking more and more about mental health, and it might be that 2022 it evolves to a much higher extent. Let's wait and see.
Yeah, absolutely. We really, really hope so, because I can remember being at a World Cup and my mental health wasn't the greatest, and I think at the time there was a little bit of bullying too within the team, and I just remember going, how am I supposed to deal with this and play well? I don't. If I'm mentally feeling really low and not able to understand what it is, how am I gonna? Do I just shut that off? Do I just become so cold? But then it affect me later on in my life. How do I deal with this? So, you really hope that there's a lot of progress being made.
Yeah, there's, as you say, that if your mental health isn't in the optimum position, there's no way you're going to be able to perform at your very best.
Absolutely. And as far as I'm concerned, and I think with sports psych in general, we can do our jobs really well with, say, as in teams or one-to-ones, but also I'm sure at some stage there has to be a framework for coaches, for clubs, in terms of mental health. And there may already be some out there for sure. But to make it so when coaches come into clubs, there's a framework set up that this is part of the game. This is part of being a coach. This is part of our club, the mental health side of it, and all the things that players might deal with, that's all part of it. So when you're coming in, yes, you're the cog in that wheel doing that specific one, but then someone else has to deal with this because this is actually part of the game and it's going to be part of our club to deal with so we can hopefully win championships. So yeah, it'd be cool if it could, go to that point.
Yeah, and I suppose it's one of the tricky bits where some sports psychologists have got some understanding of mental health. Some have got a big understanding of mental health. Some don't have any understanding, and it's a bit of a minefield there.
It really is, because remember, I mean, as you obviously you've done this for a lot longer than I have, but even in terms of education surrounding sports psychology, it's I remember looking maybe 7 or 8 years ago and couldn't find hardly a thing. You could find psychology, but in terms of relating it to sport and having a bit of a framework surrounding words and certain aspects, then it wasn't too much around, and it's hard. It depends whether someone's coming from a clinical psychologist point of view, a performance or just blood sports psychology kind of point of view, or coming from just a pure psychological point of view. So yeah, it's hard to figure out which is going to be exactly best. But yeah, I think it's still an emerging world.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I suppose these conversations help coaches and administrators recognize that there are differences there and they need to do their homework.
Yeah, definitely.
So I've loved this conversation, Hannah. It's been enlightening, and I'm sure the listeners will get a lot from it. Whereabouts can they find you if they want to reach out to you and ask any questions?
Yeah, I'm just on hbathletemindset.com. And basically it's Hannah Bromley Athlete Mindset. And so just hit me up on there and enjoy having a look on the website. And there's a few kind of personal stories. Of course, the career of being a pro and international player, as well as getting into the world of sports psych. And get in touch.
Brilliant. All right. I appreciate your time, Hannah. Thanks very much.
Cool. No worries. Thank you so much for having me.
I found the more we discussed things there with Hannah, the more emotional that I became. Now, I can be quite tough to read, but inside I could feel it. Hannah's experiences really emphasised to me the power that coaches do have on players and the impact that they can have not only on performance levels, but also on a player's mental health. I'm very much of the mindset that the authoritative coach should be a thing of the past. Coaches, for me, should be collaborative. They should be able to throw their egos to one side and recognise that each and every individual that they come across is different. Creating a psychologically safe environment should be a priority in my book for every coach. And on that score, I'm going to go on to share 4 tips for coaches if they do want to create that psychologically safe environment, whilst also developing mentally tougher, more robust, when I say human beings here, not players, but human beings who can deal with pressure and stress better. So 1 is being present and engaged, ensuring that you as a coach actively listen to your players, showing them the respect that they deserve, valuing their ideas and their opinions. And if you're distracted, if you're there in body, but you're not there in spirit, you're not interested in what they're saying, this is going to cause significant challenges. It certainly isn't going to create that environment where people feel free to be able to speak up. Number 2, showing people that you care. So in addition to active listening, you could get into the habit of trying to understand the player's perspective by asking effective questions when you do have conversations. For instance, if a player complains that they can't do a certain skill, for example, a goalkeeper, they might struggle coming off their line to deal with crosses, and they actually tell you that. So as a coach, you could rephrase that. I heard you say that you struggle to come off your line to deal with crosses. Why is that? As opposed to jumping straight in there and giving them solutions. Because this can open up conversations and dialogue and help clarify any misunderstandings. And you can understand what's going on inside of their heads. Number 3, consider your body language, eye contact, your facial expressions, and actively appearing interested by the way that you hold your body can demonstrate that you're engaged. Nodding your head in discussions, leaning forward can be helpful. So making sure if you're a coach that you're aware when you look tired, when you look bored, when you look unhappy. Players are going to see this a mile off, and some are likely to internalize some of these messages that you're sending. This can then stop them approaching you, even for the smallest things. Lastly, avoid the blame game. Ensure when meetings take place with your players, set some standards around blame so that everybody is on the same page. It's so easy when things go wrong in sport, when emotions run high as they do, to get involved in blaming people for certain things. However, if you're going to build a sporting environment which maintains psychological safety, your focus must be on solutions and what needs to happen, certainly not the blame game. So, for example, in video analysis sessions, often errors are pointed out time and time again. And then what happens after these errors are pointed out? Players come away feeling angry. They feel deflated. It goes on to have a big influence on their confidence levels. Whereas if you ask really good questions, how can we make sure that this element of your game goes better next time? To move forward more smoothly next time, what is it that you need to do? This can then turn into a conversation on an individual or group level, as opposed to singling people out for errors. So I hope my little summary at the end has helped. I hope you've enjoyed Hannah's episode. I certainly did. Please do get in touch if you've got any questions, or again, get in touch if you'd like to hear more on this topic or any other topics. I'd love to hear from you on what it is that you'd like to get from this podcast. Have a great week ahead. If you enjoyed this episode of the Demystifying Mental Toughness podcast with David Charlton, do check out my website, sport-excellence.co.uk, and my online sport psychology resources. Sport-Excellence website has essential resources for anyone looking to build their own mental toughness or the mental toughness of their athletes or teams, or if you want to achieve peak performance more often or optimal functioning. The Sport Excellence website has everything you need to keep moving forward and thrive. So go on, head over to sport-excellence.co.uk to find out more.